hottest year. And indications are that this last year is probably going to be a new world record of highest global temperatures once again. So that's the background to the Paris climate negotiations. Here you see a picture of the international negotiators at Paris. And what is, from my perspective, a real achievement is that for the first time we have an agreement that includes most countries in the world on reducing greenhouse gas emissions or slowing the growth of greenhouse gas emissions at some point, depending on the stage of development of the country. So in that sense, I think Paris was an achievement. What is also clear is that Paris is not enough. So the opening comment about Paris was both, in a sense, a miracle achievement, but at the same time not enough. Both of those are, from my perspective, very, very true. What we did get in Paris are some important statements. One is a global agreement that there should be at least a 2-degree temperature cap, that we shouldn't allow average temperatures to increase above 2 degrees centigrade in the next century, and if at all possible, to keep that increase to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. We are already at over 1 degree centigrade increase. So in that sense, we don't have a lot of playroom anymore. But still, it's quite an achievement, I think, that this target was agreed upon. One of the areas that there's been criticism from the environmental community is that the targets that countries agreed to are voluntary targets, nationally determined commitments for CO2 emission reductions. What I think is important in this background is that the major emitting countries, the United States, China, the European Union, India, Japan, Russia, have all agreed to some kind of target. If you add up the targets of the biggest emitting countries, which are about 75 to 80% of CO2 emissions, you will see that the nationally determined commitments will not keep us within 2 degrees. We are instead looking more at a 3.5, maybe 3.7 degrees centigrade increase. So it's not enough. What is good is what comes next here, that the countries also agreed to a review process. So countries are expected to annually report on the achievements of meeting their targets, and that these commitments are supposed to be reviewed internationally, so progress is supposed to be reviewed internationally, and every 5 years there is to be an effort to reconsider whether or not the targets are sufficient. So this part of the agreement, I think, is crucial. It basically says what we agreed to in Paris is a first step, and the hope is that as we learn more and more people recognize that this climate change science is not something that you can really put in doubt, hopefully that will lead to stronger commitments over time. And maybe also as more and more countries get experience with renewable energy, with energy efficiency, that will also make it easier to strengthen commitments. There was also an agreement for enhancing the amount of aid for developing countries to increase the level above $100 billion per year. Now, what does this mean for the energy industry? It means big, big changes in the next 50 to 100 years. It means essentially we will see, if we are successful, an end to the days of fossil fuels. We will basically require moving away from the use of coal, both lignite and hard coal, oil, and eventually also natural gas. In order to do this, we need revolutions. We need an energy efficiency revolution, and we need a renewable energy revolution. Without that, we will not be able to achieve what we're talking about in Paris. Finally, there's the question of what will happen with nuclear energy, and there I think we're going to see a lot of differences among countries on how they view this particular technology. Personally, I think it's going to have a hard time because it's a quite expensive technology, but we will see what happens there. So where are renewables in the world today? Where do they stand? 23% of electricity production worldwide is now renewables. And what's maybe interesting to know is that nuclear energy, which some time back was seen as the solution to our electricity needs, has been declining. Its height was around 1996 when it was 17% of global electricity production. And in 2013, it was at about 11% of electricity production. So renewables are expanding, nuclear is declining, and then the big question is, what do we do about the fossil fuels? Now, maybe some of you know of the International Renewable Energy Agency. This was an idea that emerged already back in 1981. It was an idea that was there to promote the development of renewables. But just to let you know how difficult it has been to get an agreement to actually introduce this new institution, it wasn't until 2009 that the International Renewable Energy Agency was founded. What it is it's basically the equivalent of the International Energy Agency, which has a fairly strong focus on fossil fuels and nuclear energy, and says, in order to promote renewables, we need a separate global institution for their promotion. I checked. Israel is a member. There are 143 countries plus the European Union that are now members of the International Renewable Energy Agency. Interestingly, neither Canada nor Brazil are members. The International Renewable Energy Agency's comments on Paris were, it's a watershed for the global energy transition. So I think this is also quite something when you see that one of the largest institutions now working for renewables is promoting what happened in Paris. Of course, renewables will only be successful if you can make an economic case for renewables. And here what we're starting to see are some real improvements, real changes. The renewable REN 21, it is a additional kind of platform that exists. It is an information platform that gathers information about what is the status of renewables around the world. They estimate that there are 7.7 million jobs now in renewables worldwide. And that if you look at this by color, the red is bioenergy jobs, the yellow is solar energy jobs, in the middle you have hydropower, and at the bottom in blue you have wind power. So you get a bit of a sense of where the jobs are right now. What we also see is that renewable energy is the energy source that is getting the most investment globally right now. And the investment rates in renewables are really quite remarkable. Solar photovoltaics in 2014 had a 30% growth rate. And if you look at their 2009 until 2014 growth rate, it averaged at about 50%. So in terms of where businesses are investing, they're investing in renewables right now. You'll also see that there was fairly high investment. Concentrated solar photovoltaics is getting a lot of attention. That's the idea of taking photovoltaics and using them to create steam and generate electricity. That's something that's particularly interesting for areas that have very, very good solar production possibilities, but maybe it's not the rooftop solar approach. Wind energy has, interestingly, even though it's the more efficient of the two sources of electricity right now, has had somewhat less investment, but still very high at about 16% in 2014 and just a little bit more than that for the last 5 years. Here you see the rise in interest in solar photovoltaic. In fact, solar photovoltaic global capacity growth has been the highest of all capacity growth in the renewables. So that's quite interesting. And why they did it this way, I don't know. If you look at these two graphs, they go in opposite directions, but they're saying the same thing. Here you see which countries are the countries that are investing most right now in capacity development. Germany remains the world leader in total amount of installed photovoltaics, which is not something you would really expect given that Germany is quite far north, has a lot of dark days, and also a lot of the days without sunshine. But I think it's an indication of what can be done if a country like Germany is investing so much in PV. But what's maybe even more interesting is that China is becoming one of the world leaders in PV. It is now at over 10 gigawatts of photovoltaic and will soon overtake Germany as the world's largest country in terms of installed photovoltaic. I think that is critical because the Chinese market is huge. And one thing we've already seen is that the cooperation between Germany and China has really helped to reduce the price of solar PV, so that in the last 5 years the cost of the technology has dropped by about 60%. And that means that solar PV is now really becoming market penetrable. It is almost grid parity, meaning the cost is for new PV not very different than the cost for introducing a new coal-fired power plant. So I think this is quite exciting what's happening. Something that might be interesting for Israel, I checked to see where can I find Israel in the maps. And I can find Israel in the graphics when we turn to solar water heating. You're not in the top 10 in terms of global capacity. In terms of global capacity, it's the United States, Germany, Turkey, Brazil, Australia, India, Austria, Greece, and Japan. But when we go and look at which countries have in 2013 added the most new solar water heating capacity, Israel is in there. So congratulations. You are number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th highest country for installing solar water heating collection capacity last year. In terms of wind power, we also see a fairly strong global growth in global wind capacity. What here is interesting is that in the last years, we're starting to see the offshore wind coming in. Offshore wind has not been a big part of global capacity yet, but that is about to change because the first major offshore wind parks are coming online in China, in Europe. So we will soon see this graph, which is almost all onshore, in the next years changing. And what's interesting about offshore is that it has a much higher efficiency. And so once you get the offshore wind park, a wind park with the same number of turbines offshore will produce 4 or 5 times as much as it would onshore. So that will be quite exciting to see. Here you see development in investment in renewables, renewable power and fuel, both in developed and developing countries. The yellow is the developed countries here, and the blue is developing countries. So what you're seeing is that both in the richer and in the developing countries, there is interest in renewables. And if you ask me, after the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord, this graph is going to go even more strongly in an upward direction. I think that is one of the biggest changes we're going to see after Paris, that the business community now sees where is the future direction of energy investment, and it will be in renewables. So far, that investment has been very heavily in photovoltaics. You can compare the amount of investment that has been going into solar PV on the top, followed by wind beneath it. And maybe some of you heard about this in the Conference of the Parties in Paris. A new council was established, the Global Solar Council. It was launched by some of the biggest solar industries in the world, and these companies have basically said they're going to work together to further promote the use of solar internationally. And maybe this is also kind of interesting when you think about how is it that renewables can make a difference. We think largely about renewables in relationship to which countries have introduced how much renewables. But let's start thinking about it in a different way. And let's ask, when the world's largest companies start to commit to changing where they get their energy from, what kind of impact can it make? So there is now an association of multinational companies that have agreed to go 100% renewable. So far, there are 53 multinationals that have said they're going to go 100% renewable. And together, they make up 0.4% of world electricity use. That's a lot, 53 companies. And they've calculated if the world's largest 1,000 companies were to agree to do it, that would be 8% of global power use. And if all companies were to do it, it would be 40 to 50% of global power use. So when we start thinking differently about how we can all make contributions to where we have to go, these are some of the changes that could be made. I looked to find out if there were an agreement among the universities of the world to go 100% renewable. What kind of impact would it make? I couldn't find the data. So I don't think it exists yet. I don't think anybody's ever made a calculation on what kind of contribution could the world's universities make in this area. But I know it's not small, because the universities tend to be some of the largest electricity users in cities of any country. So that is basically what I wanted to say. I think the Paris negotiations were a step in the right direction. I think they will be a big boost for renewables. If you want to ask where should you be investing your money, don't do it in coal. I think you can get much farther doing it with renewables. We are going to see some big changes. Maybe as a final comment, where we are seeing universities starting to make a difference, there's a lot of divestment movements happening. A lot of students demanding universities think about divesting their money from industries that are in the fossil fuels. The Norwegian pension fund, which is the world's largest pension fund, has announced its plans to divest out of fossil fuel-based investments. So the push is on, but there's still a lot to do, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations in the next 2 hours. Thank you.